alcohol, drugs, tobacco, gambling, health injustice, that's health in criminal justice settings, not injustice in health, although there is a bit of that, and migrant health. So that's what my division covers. What I'm going to try and do today is to cover what the evidence tells us about what harm alcohol causes, what government, national and local government agencies can do through social policy, and what might be effective in tertiary education settings. We're an evidence-based organisation, so I'm not trying to sell anything. This is just what the evidence tells us. There is quite a lot of evidence about what I'm going to cover, all of which is available in a really handy 500-page summary, which is a fantastic document, which is produced by my organisation a couple of years ago, and it's about all of the evidence around alcohol harms and policies. So the way people drink in England, people say that people in England drink as if they're going to have it taken away from them. I need to point out I'm coming from an England perspective because we are Public Health England. I think, you know, the majority of people in the UK live in England, and this will give you a pretty good idea that's valid in other nations, although Scotland, the harms and consumption are greater in general than they are in England. So the way people drink in England, what we need to look at, it'd be really handy if I could move this. There we go. So we need to look at units. A unit, I haven't gone into describing in detail what comprises how many units in various drinks, but as a very, very rough rule of thumb, a unit is a pint of beer is 2 units, a shot of vodka is 1 unit, a glass of wine is about 2 units. So in 2016, the UK Chief Medical Officers reviewed all of the international evidence about alcohol harm, and the recommendation is that to keep the risk of the lifetime risk of alcohol-related ill health low, both men and women should try not to exceed 14 units per week. Increasing risk, so increasing risk means increasing that lifetime risk of alcohol-related ill health. And those who drink, men who drink 15 to 49 units and women who drink 15 to 34 units a week are increasing their lifetime risk of alcohol-related ill health. Higher risk drinking means that you're quite possibly drinking enough that you're already experiencing, maybe known, maybe unknown, but already experiencing some of the harmful effects from alcohol, and you probably are already suffering ill health as a result of your alcohol use. And that's basically men who drink more than 50 and women who drink more than 35 units per week. So this is how it looks in England. About 20% of the population don't drink at all, they're abstinent. Another 57% drink within those low risk levels. So they're drinking at a level that basically exposes you to as much risk from alcohol as just walking about as ordinary life. That's what low risk means in that context. So about 77% of people drink within those low risk guidelines. The remaining 22 and something percent are drinking at increasing risk 18.7 or higher risk. And higher risk encompasses, for the most part, this dependent drinking population, people who are drinking in a dependent way, which basically means drinking in a way that over-prioritizes alcohol, continuing to drink despite harmful side effects, and finding it difficult to stop drinking, and increasing urge to drink. most dependent drinkers are higher risk than all of them. So these people, these increasing risk and dependent and higher risk drinkers, are accruing risk of lifetime alcohol-related ill health. And then you've got binge drinking. So binge drinkers may not drink very often at all. They might, for the most part, be low-risk drinkers, but they will occasionally binge, or people might binge more frequently. And what binge drinking primarily exposes you to is risk of acute harm, risk of harm from being drunk, from intoxication. So that's things like your injuries, violence, etc. So that's pretty much how the population drinks. Now, that's one thing to say, is that alcohol consumption in England per capita consumption of alcohol has been consistently going down for the last few years, which I guess is a good thing. However, harm is not going down. So what we conclude from that is that whilst probably fewer people, more people are abstaining, it appears, and more people are drinking at lower risk. So the people who weren't drinking very much in the first place are drinking less, but there are still pockets of people who are drinking for England who are seriously drinking, and those are the people who are incurring the harm. So despite an overall population reduction in consumption, there's still a sustained or increasing consumption among groups that were already at risk. And what this chart shows is of that population who drink above low risk, that 22 point something percent, it's older people tend to drink the most. So people in the middle-aged men and in an earlier age, middle-aged women, more of them drink above low risk, or the proportion of people drinking at low risk are comprised mostly of those age groups. So down at the younger age, there are far fewer people drinking above low risk. And to look at student populations, I know are not exclusively young people, but predominantly, I'm sure. So what we've got here is an interesting trend. This only goes up to 2014 because the chart was handy, but we do have evidence that these trends are continuing. So what you've got are more under 24s abstaining from alcohol completely. We've got a reduction in binge drinking, a reduction in drinking above, that says limit, above low risk, and an increase in people not drinking in the last week. So the trend has been and continues to be that younger people are drinking less alcohol. Within that, bear in mind that whenever we're looking at whole population data, there will almost always be pockets where that is not the case. So this drinking, what harm does it do? The harm from alcohol. So I don't know can I ask questions of the group? So there are, I'm going to, there are 1.1 million alcohol-related hospital admissions a year. It's a much publicized figure. So that's not necessarily 1.1 million people in hospital because of alcohol, but that's basically the number of the number of hospital admissions there would not be if alcohol didn't exist. It's been fairly consistent around the just over 1 million mark for several years. So does anyone want to hazard a guess at what is the biggest health condition that makes up that 1.1 million? What would you expect to see there? I don't know if this asking questions is going to work, but anyone want to pipe up? No, that's too. Oh, hang on, somebody. Does that mean I'm getting? Never mind.
I can read them out for you if you want, Ian. We've got in the chat box accidents, falls, alcohol poisoning, diabetes. So far has come through from, or physical injury from fighting.
Great, that's what I thought you might say. Thanks very much for that. So we do tend to think about those acute harms, those harms from intoxication, as being the major things that alcohol causes. But in fact, this is how they make up. The majority of alcohol-related hospital admissions are cardiovascular. Well, not the majority, but the biggest single group of conditions, they're cardiovascular conditions. So that's things like heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure. So people in hospital, not necessarily for those things, but who have those things as a diagnosis, most of them are heart conditions, and that comes, or cardiovascular conditions, which come from a sustained period of drinking above that low risk level. So drinking, that's what your increases risk of, one of the things. Things like injuries are there, but they're relatively small. You could actually deal with all of the drunkenness and ill health that comes from drunkenness, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference to alcohol-related ill health and the impact on the NHS. As you can see, that's a relatively small proportion. It's a significant impact on the NHS because it's very troublesome. It's significant to the people who it befalls, obviously, but it isn't the biggest thing. So we do need to think more broadly about alcohol-related harm. You have got liver disease here, which is, again, is relatively small, but that kills people and is doing, I'll come on to that shortly, it's killing people at an increasing rate. So alcohol is a toxin. It's a mind-altering drug. It's an addictive drug. And it's a class A carcinogen. So it can affect almost every tissue of the body. It actually is a causal factor in over 60 health conditions in the ICD-10, the International Classification of Diseases. And these are some of the conditions and impacts that alcohol can have on the body. You can digest that later. I presume that these slides can be shared, and I'll send a PDF that can be shared, and you can look at these at your leisure. Death. So alcohol is the single biggest risk factor for early mortality in 15 to 49-year-olds, the single biggest. In 2019, which is the last reliable figures, we've got around 24,000 people died from alcohol-related causes. That alcohol-related means things that are caused sometimes by alcohol, not as opposed to alcohol-specific, which are things that are only caused by alcohol. So that would include some cardiovascular diseases. In young men aged between 16 and 24, more than a fifth of all deaths, a large proportion of which are suicide, are alcohol related. And liver disease, as I say, liver disease deaths increased 400%, or have done since 1970. And men tend to get liver disease more than women, which is something to do with the fact that men tend to drink more than women on a population level. In terms of social impacts, you get violent assaults, as you've recognised, domestic violence and marital breakdown. Serious case reviews are cases where the social services led case reviews where there's been a serious incident involving a death, and nearly a third of those have alcohol as a significant factor. The impact on children from parental alcohol use, and 16% of road fatalities involve a driver who's been drinking. Just looking at some new data about the COVID pandemic and how people have been drinking in the COVID pandemic. We're about to produce a report about drinking during COVID. And it does seem that during the last 12 months, there has been a change in the way that we drink. And quite alarmingly, this is quite a stark chart, what we see, and this trend does seem to be continuing, is that alcohol-related mortality, most of which is liver disease, so deaths have increased. The green line there is a combination of is what happened in 2018 and 19, and the red line with the pinkish bits being the confidence intervals is the death rate in 2020 from liver disease. So there does seem to have been an alarming rise in liver disease during the COVID pandemic. So moving on to what's effective in addressing alcohol-related harm. So looking at all of the global evidence, as our report did, it's fairly clear what the most impactful things are on alcohol-related, reducing alcohol-related harm. The best thing to do is to affect the price of alcohol. That is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most effective thing to do. And that's either affecting the price across the board through taxation, or by regulating price specifically, for instance, by minimum unit pricing, which affects only the cheapest products. So it doesn't necessarily affect the prices of a pint to the average drinker or an average bottle of wine. But what it does do is it affects the cheapest alcohol, such as white cider and cheap beer, cheap spirits, which are those that tend to be targeted by the heaviest drinkers and by children. Where minimum unit pricing has been implemented, which is most widespread in Canada, what we saw was a fairly immediate impact on alcohol-related harm. Regulating marketing, brief interventions, which I'm going to come on to talk to in a minute, which is identification and brief advice, or screening and brief interventions, it's sometimes called, and structured treatment for dependent drinkers, this aimed at an individual level. So to look at those a little bit more, taxation and pricing to reduce affordability has a swift impact. Just regulating physical access to drinks or certain alcoholic drinks, either at a retail level, so things like no low strength programs where retailers have decided not to sell, sorry, no high strength, not to sell very high strength products, seems to have shown some effectiveness. And production level availability, so the alcohol industry just changing their production so that they are producing either lower drinks or lower strength drinks or no alcohol drinks. The alcohol industry isn't necessarily inclined to do this. There was a thing called the responsibility deal, which was a deal brokered between the alcohol industry and government. It was various sort of health endangering industries and government, where the industry pledged to take 1 billion units out of the market, 1 billion units of alcohol. These don't appear to have been particularly effective, possibly understandably, as the alcohol industry has an interest in selling alcohol, and some might say in making sure that alcohol is as enjoyable, possibly addictive as possible. Regulating marketing so that young people in particular are not exposed to alcohol marketing, and managing the drinking environment, so actually enforcing something that is effective is things like making sure that servers making servers liable for holding servers liable for serving to people who are drunk, which is actually an offence, and making them liable for the effects of that action. Difficult to enforce, not popular, but where it has been introduced, it's proved effective. Information and education. So the public have a right to know that alcohol is a potentially harmful substance, so the foregoing. They have a right to know that, and there has been some move to convey that by product labelling about things like alcohol content. All alcohol in this country containers have content labelling, and some have health warnings around pregnancy. Mass media and marketing campaigns can provide that information as well. So it's a very popular approach to actually try and just tell people about the risks of alcohol. All of the evidence shows that that can make people think and can drive them towards interventions that are actually effective. But labeling, information campaigns, marketing do not change behavior. They don't change how people drink. So on their own, they are not particularly effective. You need them in conjunction with behavior change interventions. Alcohol education in schools. So educating young people about alcohol as part of school curricula is at best not effective. So here's a session about alcohol education. That doesn't affect the way that young people drink, according to the evidence. And in fact, at worst, the alcohol industry actually sponsor education on alcohol. And the World Health Organization says that in particular, those industry-sponsored education activities can be counterproductive. What we do know is that wider training in resilience, so how to make decisions, giving people decision-making skills, teaching them how to resist peer pressure, these can be effective in addressing a wide range of risky behavior, sexual behavior, drug taking, alcohol. So these would be far more effective, and it makes sense, I think, than simply teaching people about alcohol and the risks associated with it. Drink driving, the evidence shows that there are some practical approaches that can be taken, lowering the legal limit for alcohol blood content, a specific lowering of the limit for young drivers. The difficulties with these, I mean, the difficulty with the zero alcohol, blood alcohol limit is that it's very difficult to enforce. There are all sorts of things that contain alcohol that you might take unwittingly. And making the penalty one that can itself be enforced also presents challenges, but that is effective. As they have in France, ignition interlocks, where you can't start your car until you've breathed into a breathalyzer, are effective and can be effective over here in terms of enforcement. Mass media campaigns may have some effect, but probably, like most mass media campaigns, not a great deal. So to get on to individual approaches, which are probably more what you're likely to be looking at in a tertiary education, is going to be more in your control in a tertiary education setting. So for people who are drinking above low risk, the increasing and higher risk drinkers who are not drinking dependently, there are now approaching 70 randomized control trials that have taken place over 30 years involving tens of thousands of individuals in the cohorts, 3 Cochrane reviews, pretty good evidence that identification and brief advice, which is sometimes called screening and brief intervention in the literature, which is a 5 to 10 minute very brief intervention, basically identifying those who are at risk and giving them some information is what that is. The evidence suggests that I think it's still 1 in 8 recipients will reduce their drinking to low risk levels who were drinking above low risk levels before, and that across the cohort it reduces consumption by 12% on average, mean actually, I think. So that is very effective for the majority of people who you're likely to come into contact with. People who are drinking dependently, which bear in mind, is about 1.2% of the English adult population, and who are mostly likely to be not necessarily old, but certainly not in the first flush of youth. It takes a while to develop dependence to alcohol. That's not to say that you can't become dependent at a very early age as well. And this involves, it's at least 12 weeks to be effective, a 12-week program that involves pharmacological treatment for, in some cases, to withdraw safely from alcohol use. Alcohol withdrawal can be fatal, so that's quite an important thing to get right. Psychosocial supports are counselling to maintain that abstinence and look at how to prevent relapse, and wraparound support for those who need it to address housing, worklessness, and mild mental health. 50% of people who engage in treatment do so successfully, and they become abstinent and they don't return to treatment and don't need any more. So it's successful in about 50% of cases for those who present to treatment. However, I can't remember if I've got this on the next slide. There are about 600,000 adults in England estimated to be dependent on alcohol, and only about 17% of them engage with treatment. Probably a very large percentage of those don't realise that they're drinking dependently and don't realise they need treatment. So looking specifically about IBA, Identification Brief Advice, as I say, strong evidence based that it's effective in reducing the level of regular alcohol consumption. It's very quick, it's very easy to deliver, it's unlikely to do any harm unless you manage to persuade a dependent drinker to suddenly stop drinking, in which case they might die, but that's quite unlikely. A, that you would convince them to suddenly stop drinking, and B, that they wouldn't necessarily die. Learning it is easy. There's plenty of resources. We've produced some online learning resources, the longest of which takes an hour, the shortest of which takes about 15 to 20 minutes. It's designed to be delivered by non-specialists, so you don't need any specialist knowledge about alcohol. There's a validated, World Health Organization validated screening questionnaire called Audit, and various short forms of that, which act as a screening tool to identify who you need to intervene with. There is an advice sheet which you can use, which guides the deliverer through the intervention, through the advice that they give, and can be given to the patient to take away afterwards as a leaflet. However, most of the evidence for IBA comes from primary care settings. There's some in other settings that shows effectiveness, but most is in primary care. We don't know how effective it would be in a student population. There's slightly worryingly, and this was with the younger population, in sexual health settings, IBA was shown to have no effect. IBA was delivered in sexual health, in gastro, in GUM clinics, to try and reduce the recurrence of STDs, and it just didn't seem to have any impact on the relatively young patient group. There's very little impact, very low impact on the under 24 age group. Most of the chronic health harm that befalls increasing and high risk drinkers happens in later life, in 50-year-olds plus 40 to 50, 60-year-olds. Maybe something that is difficult to, speaking personally, I found that difficult to grasp when I was that age. Difficult to get concerned about. That may have something to do with it. There are possibly more immediate and important things more immediate priorities for that age group. There have been some for instance, in a criminal justice setting, it was recognised that possibly with offenders, they were less concerned about their long-term health than they were about getting nicked and going to prison again. So there were some initiatives that showed some success where changing the focus of the advice or changing the consequences of the advice has been more effective than the usual approach, which is to give advice about health. So giving advice, there may be some mileage in giving advice about things that actually do concern the cohort that the interventions are aimed at. And that's something that can be gained from asking the cohort what they are concerned about. This is a scratch card that can be used to identify the level of risk. This is based on a short form of audit, the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Tool, called Audit C, which looks at consumption. 3 questions. You score up to 4, you're lower risk. You score 5 to 10, you're increasing or higher risk and should have a brief advice. 11 to 12, you're probably dependent and should be referred for specialist assessment. This is the patient leaflet, which you can use, that I described earlier, that you can use to talk through the intervention, that talks about the risks. And these here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but progressively increasing risk of. This is the bit that was changed in the criminal justice setting to try to make it the risks more relevant to the group that the intervention was aimed at. Finally, treatment for alcohol dependence. Every local authority area at the moment provides free specialist treatment for alcohol dependence. So anyone who's scoring 10 to 11 on that Audit C screen needs to be assessed for alcohol dependence, and that's where they can get it for free, followed by treatment if it's necessary. As I say, the prevalence is less than 2% of the adult population, so the number of people you're likely to see in any setting is relatively low, but they will be there, so you need to be prepared for them. As I said earlier, I kept preempting myself, less than 20% of the estimated adult dependent population are actually engaged with treatment, actually 17% currently. Many don't recognise their dependence, and the average age of people who actually do engage in treatment is 42. And I think it's about 60% male, 40% female. So there is some food for thought. I think that's my last slide. And I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand you to Rachel.
Caught me mid-water swig there, everyone. I'm going to do the fancy screen sharing my side as well. When I do that, it means I'm suddenly not going to see anything that is going on. So I'm sure people will let me know if it's all going a bit higgledy-piggledy.
We definitely will. No need to worry, Rachel.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Colley. I'm the community manager at the Students' Union at UWE, and I'm following on from Ian's presentation to put some of the identification and brief advice that IBA into context for how we have used this in a university setting. So I'm going to talk to you today about Drink Rethink, which is a preventative approach which aims to reduce high-risk drinking behaviours among students by training student ambassadors to use an evidence-based behaviour change tool, so this IBA, to deliver an alcohol intervention on campus. And this presentation is going to be utilising the results from the SOS UK NUS report, which was coordinated by Lucy Ann Henry at the time that we delivered this intervention. So we participated in the first pilot of this intervention back in 2018 alongside Keel. I know Cara's on the call, so Cara, you can just call me out in the chat box if I'm saying anything incorrect. So IBA entails delivering brief advice after the completion of the World Health Organization approved alcohol use disorders identification test called the acronym AUDIT, and it's a preventative approach aimed at identifying problem behaviours and providing guidance to increasing and higher risk drinkers. So Drink Rethink has drawn on the experience of a project using a similar approach with members of the public in an everyday setting. This was called the London Challenge, and it was commissioned by the Lambeth Alcohol Prevention Group and was delivered to the general public outside a very busy London tube station. And the project found that alcohol IBA can effectively be delivered by newly trained non-healthcare workers in a public environment. And feedback from participants who engaged in the project was also positive. And all but 2 participants of the 18 who consented to further research reported lower audit scores 6 to 9 weeks after the intervention. So Drink Rethink adapted the approach used by the London Challenge for a student audience and also drew on evidence which suggests that interventions conducted within a university setting and by non-healthcare professionals could show greater efficiency compared to similar delivery in other non-health related settings. So NUS at the time worked with Safe Sociable London Partnership, lots of great words there, to deliver the project. And that partnership, SSLP as the acronym, are a social purpose consultancy focused on preventing health harms through public health approaches and have particular experience in alcohol related harm. So the 2 university sites were chosen for the pilot project, both of which have previously participated in NUS's alcohol impact accreditations, Keele and Newey. So we were already part of the NUS cohort looking at inclusive campus culture, thinking about our alcohol interventions. And this was another intervention that NUS was offering to give us support on rolling out to our student cohorts. So initially, both universities and student unions recruited and trained students in delivering the IBA approach to use during this intervention. And they were paid for this work. Before you ask the question, they were not volunteering, they were paid to be these student ambassadors. Ambassadors were also asked to complete surveys before and after their participation to assess how the opportunity enabled them to develop their key skills and also if there'd been an impact on their own alcohol consumption. So from a participant or a student perspective, after being approached by an ambassador and agreeing to take part, each student completed the 3 audit C questions. If a score of more than 5 was reached at this stage, students would then ask the remaining audit questions. Students would then shown their total audit score, followed by given a leaflet that was tailored according to the audit risk category of alcohol dependency, whether they were low risk, increasing risk, high risk, and higher risk / possibly dependent. Students were also signposted towards welfare and support services at their university or in their local city for further advice. To evaluate the impact of this intervention, participants were invited to complete online surveys 1 week and 12 weeks after completing the initial audit. And you've got some pictures. These are real pictures of it being delivered on campus sites, and giving you a flavour of also what the leaflet looked like that was given to students who participated in the intervention. So, was it a success? How did this work? In terms of successes, things that work really well about this intervention is that if you could get your group of ambassadors to talk to groups of students, they were more likely to participate as a group, rather than picking off that one student who's trying to go to the library or head into the students' union bar. So that worked 2 ways to enable engagement of students. Firstly, like the ambassadors worked in small groups to deliver the intervention, so they felt supported together and they could set up a table with sweets and signs and branded t-shirts, etc. So it got students' attentions as they were walking past, and they're able to support one another in then reaching out to students. And if they approached groups of students, we normally found that those students then compared their scores together and discussed their results with each other and went off reading the leaflets and continuing the conversation together. Other things that worked really well was having the incentives. So being able to get them involved with hot drinks vouchers or sweets. We know students do like free things, and that definitely made the engagement more successful. but also just having the flexibility to make it work for your university and your campus. You can set up this intervention wherever you think it would work best, whether you have an area of high footfall on your campus, or you have specific campuses that have specific pockets where you can engage students. You could set yourself up there. So we tried both outside our library and outside the SU bar, and both had you know, differing success, but definitely outside the main Union bar as people were coming in. And it's a bar, but it's also like a cafe where students were going to get food. That tended to be where students are more willing to stop and have a conversation because they weren't sort of heading into the library. So the group of ambassadors at each site were allocated 120 hours to deliver the intervention. And we had the flexibility to develop our timetable for delivery based on our local knowledge of what would work best in engaging our participants. So at the Students' Unit, UE, the ambassadors delivered 134 hours of engagement over 18 shifts, and this happened over 2 weeks in April. And at least 2 ambassadors were on the shift at any time. Let's talk about results. How did it go? So the ambassador experience first. Ambassadors were asked to complete their baseline and their follow-up surveys for us to help understand the personal development outcomes associated with participating in the project. So out of the 10 who responded, we found that you know, the good results. 4 said that they felt more confident working with other people as part of a team, and that they were more confident in putting their ideas forward. So we saw a little nudge in it being a good opportunity for students to have something else to add to their CV and showcase skills, whether or not they felt that this was an opportunity where they could develop them. It really was an opportunity for them to think about, you know, going up and talking to students and having that kind of almost sales experience of getting involved in it without being pressurizing. In terms of the participant experience, after completing the audit, participants were given the option of providing their contact details to participate in further research associated with this intervention. 277 students agreed to be recontacted, and they were sent invitations to complete 2 further surveys, as I said before, so 1 week after and 12 weeks after their participation. The 1 and 12-week surveys included attitude and experience questions related to alcohol consumption, alongside a repeat of the Audit C questions, allowing any changes in drinking habits and related experiences to be assessed. So 36 students responded to week 1, which is a response rate of 13%, and 18 students responded to the 12-week survey, which is a 6% response rate. And this is despite offering incentives to respondents. So the responses received are not substantial enough to give a sort of meaningful comment on the impact of participation in this particular drinking behaviour, which is unfortunate. But this experience does mirror that of the London Challenge delivery team as well. And in addition to a low response rate, those that did respond tended to be low risk drinkers in the first place. So it's really difficult to comment on the impact of participants' drinking behaviour in the long term, which does mirror a lot of what Ian was saying before about this is one tool in our toolkit to use for talking to students, but maybe it really needs further tweaking in order to be relevant for the students that we're trying to reach. So the intervention audit scores revealed that almost 2/3 of students who engaged in Drink Rethink fell into the low risk category, and 4% of those engaged fell into the higher risk / possibly dependent category. And significant differences in terms of demographics are shown in each of the segments. So as you can see from the chart, 64% of students were low risk, and they were more likely to be 25 years and below. And where we've got the 4% who were that higher risk and possibly dependent, no participants over the age of 24 fell into the category. So it shows that we were also targeting more of like a typical undergraduate profile than potentially mature students on campus at this time. Okay, so in terms of results, this is from the 36 respondents who replied to the 1 week on survey. 15 agreed that Drink Rethink gave them information about their alcohol consumption that they weren't aware of previously. So that's really positive that half of those who were engaged enough to then respond, felt that they were learning something new. 12 agreed that Drink Rethink made them think about changing how they drink alcohol. 7 agreed that Drink Rethink made them change how often they drink alcohol, and 7 agreed that Drink Rethink made them change how much alcohol they drink. So obviously it depends at your university setting and your student union setting what kind of numbers of engagement and change you're hoping to reach. But for us, actually, there's some really nice, small, positive examples there that it can have a positive impact in at least keeping the dialogue going and providing groups of students with some more tools that they can consider. We've got to talk about challenges. We can't just talk about positives without talking about challenges. So on the flip side of groups being a positive, despite the benefits of engaging groups of students, which we outlined previously, some ambassadors noted that this could also be a downside to this approach, where someone in that group may have received a higher audit score than their friends. They could seem embarrassed, and in other cases the relative scores turned into like a jokey subject of, you know, who's got the highest score, and maybe it didn't show such meaningful engagement with the process, which is a shame. Framing participation as well. It was really important that ambassadors were super clear about what the project was. So ambassadors reported that some students interpreted engagement as just like, I'm going to fill in a survey, and maybe this is because in university culture we're always seeking a survey from students, and they weren't really expecting that it was almost like a bit of an intervention and you're going to receive a leaflet afterwards depending on your score. So just making sure you make that really clear, rather than like, do you have a few minutes to fill in the survey? It's more than that. And location as well, really being selective of where you want to put your drink rethink intervention, as some areas were less suitable for meaningful engagement. Like if you're just going into the library, even though it's high footfall, it's quite difficult to stop students who are on their way to study and perhaps have less time to stop. And the same was reported outside of lecture theatres. That's just not what those students are thinking of at that time. So in terms of longer term drink rethink, so why are we talking about this today? How does this connect to the offer that NUS has for us all, and how can we think about it? As Ian pointed out, one of the downsides that we currently have felt to drink rethink is that, and we see from the national survey that's conducted every other year for alcohol of students in the sector, is that students don't necessarily care about the longer term health consequences. And so we're looking to see how, as a group, and I'm hoping that some of you on the call would want to join in on this, with support from SOS UK, we could reframe some of the intervention or some of the information that we give out as part of Drink Rethink to students. Could we potentially link it to the things that students have told us that they're interested in? And those are what are on the screen right now. Not to say that some of this isn't extremely problematic for us to be able to frame effectively within a leaflet, but is there a way we can link it to mental health, as Cara was talking about in her presentation yesterday about drugs and mental health link? What more information can we give about, and Cara did cover alcohol as well, but alcohol and mental health? How about sugar intake, and perhaps the negative achievement consequences that can come from continued disengagement in academic studies due to alcohol use? And maybe could we base the local intervention from your data from the central alcohol survey, if you participate in the might be annual now, but it's going to 2 years, every other year, the annual student biennial, there's a word for it, student alcohol survey, to make it more fit the concerns of your students. So from our students, they wanted to know more about hangovers. There was some comments around calories, skin. Some of those are very difficult. That's why we haven't acted on some of these comments, because we know talking about calories and alcohol can be particularly challenging, especially around, you don't want to be engaging in negative eating patterns and drinking, or thinking about entering into a fat shaming situation. We really want to think about how we can use those messages, but how do we better hook students in with areas that they really care about? So just to let you know, and I think Michelle's going to post this link in the chat box, that you can join the Drink Rethink programme. So SOS UK are launching Drink Rethink, and it's now open to all universities and student unions. And you can find out more on the link. And basically, if you sign up, you'll get all the resources and support to recruit your student ambassadors, options to lots of training and questionnaires, and all the resources that you need to make Drink Rethink at your university. And I should just say that what we're hoping to do perhaps through this Drink Rethink work is maybe that cohort could work together on considering how we could really make Drink Rethink as effective as possible and build the data as to where it's working really well. So for example, if we know that IBA is maybe more effective with over 24s potentially, do you have a campus site that has a more mature student profile? We do here at UE. It's our Glenside campus, our healthcare campus, where we have a larger mature student proportion who come to do our healthcare courses. Maybe this is an intervention that actually those students would be a lot more receptive of, to think about the habits, because that binge drinking habit that might be inflating some of their scores might for some students not be a problematic behaviour long term. So maybe we could think about trying to engage more of those students and changing the message. So that's me. I'm going to now stop sharing my screen so I can see any questions and maybe have a conversation in the chat box. I actually don't know how long we have left, which is, we have 5 minutes left, maybe to talk about whether you think Drink Rethink or another tool, another intervention of this nature could be useful, and how we could make it really relevant and specific to our student bodies and make sure it's still not a preachy intervention, but informative, giving students the tools and tips that they need to having a really healthy, safe, vibrant time at university.
Sorry, Rachel, I overran. My fault.
Let's see what we have in the chat box.
We had lots of comments about.
Sorry, someone's mentioned about the financial angle there. You know, the most effective way of reducing consumption is cost. And I mean, I don't know if this is still the case, but student unions tended to be quite cheap when I was a student. So that isn't necessarily helping things. What you've also got is a much wider range now of no and low alcohol drinks that could be championed. So you can actually affect the drinking environment where there is control over student union bars. And from the fat point of view, just the only substance that's more calorific than 1 gram of alcohol is 1 gram of fat.
I know it's difficult for our student unions sometimes, because if we push prices up, then it pushes students off of campus, and you know, we can control the environment a lot less in the local community, although you know, there are definitely SUs that do amazing stuff working with local bars and clubs, but there's always a bit of a challenge. Partly obviously student unions have to cover their costs, but then also worrying about pushing students off campus. So I suppose that's another thing to consider within it, because you know, we can do a lot more training with the staff in our bars and on campus than we can necessarily off campus. But yeah, it is definitely, cost does seem to be a very big behaviour driver with this.
Michelle, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, but either you're sat very still or your video's frozen.
Yeah, I've got but my webinar's not responding, so I'm so sorry. It's just about to crash. But I did see that Cara also put in the box about talking to students about the financial implications of.
I know.
Oh, I think that Rachel's gone.
I can't see anybody or anything. It is gone a bit blank.
Oh, you're back. Sorry about that, Rachel. At least it happened at the end when you'd done your wonderful presentation and not halfway through.
Oh dear, I'm so sorry.
Do you want to just repeat your point about what Cara put in the chat box?
Of Cara was talking about how students really care about money. So in terms of the financial implications for students too, so how much you drink and how much you could save around a year or a particular period of time. And I think that's something we could really work on, is around the connection between money and drinking and drugs, because we know that financing the university experience and money concerns are always very high up on students' list of concerns.
Definitely. I can see somebody's put in the chat box here that they'd love to see something like this at the University of Bristol, and that they think in terms of mental health, a lot of people talk about anxiety or feeling anxious the morning after drinking. That's, yeah, definitely something. I thought that was only something that people in their 30s had, but you know, some students are in their 30s, and it's definitely something that, you know, you hear a lot more about as you get older. But yeah, that's definitely true, that the links with mental health. I think with drugs and alcohol, it's a short-term fix sometimes that does make the long-term issue worse. Oh, Lily's put that they're 21 and get anxiety. Maybe it's just me that it kicked in more when I got older, I don't know. Ooh, what's the drink and drugs meter? Somebody's put that the drink and drugs meter worked well for them when thinking about financial intervention.
I think that's the thing that tracks your spend on. Maybe, is it? There are numerous apps where you can track how much you spend, which can be quite frightening.
That's wicked. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Is that an app, or is it a website, or is it a program that people have to sign up to, or is it available to all students?
I don't know, but somebody said yes, it is a thing that calculates your spending. Becky said.
Oh, Becky's going to put a link in the chat. And
there we go.
Amazing.
I mean, I think we're starting to see. I think there is real potential value in asking, in really doing some research into what students are concerned about in relation to alcohol. Is it weight? Is it fitness? I mean, I think the reduction in young people's drinking, there is some theory is that part of that is due to an increased interest in fitness, not necessarily health awareness, but an interest in fitness among some young people. But, you know, I think finding out what the negatives are about alcohol for people, and trying to tailor brief interventions around that might have some mileage. I mean, it is an effective. We don't completely understand why it's effective, but it is an effective intervention. It's not one that's driven by fear. It's a positive thing. So, you know, talking about heart disease when you're 50 isn't necessarily going to work, but talking about the things that do concern people might well be more effective.
Definitely. We've got a question in the chat box as well from Emma on what are your thoughts on campaigns like Dry January?
So dry, I was actually instrumental in the start of Dry January, which came over from Australia. It's, I mean, evidence isn't. We don't have enough evidence at the moment. But what has emerged is that it does seem to. The key thing about it is it seems to reset people's relationship with alcohol. You get a break, so you get a watershed, and so there is some evidence that people are actually sustaining abstinence, or at least abstinence and reduced drinking following Dry January, which may or may not be due to a sort of resetting your body's clock. So yeah, I mean, it's the thing about Dry January though is there's no point in Dry January if it's followed by a thirsty February. You know, the harm comes from all of the alcohol you drink in your life. So if you're just going to replace what you would have drunk in January by drinking more the rest of the year, that's not going to be effective. But we think that this watershed, this break, potentially does have a beneficial impact.
And from a student union perspective as well, these are different interventions as well. You could think about creating as part of your calendar of comms with students too. So you're always thinking about the messages that you're putting out to students. You're regularly communicating around harm reduction, drugs and alcohol, different tools that might work for different groups. So you can communicate, like Ian said, the things that are good about Dry January, the drawbacks, if you're going to use it as an opportunity to kind of like store up those units for later. But it's an opportunity to keep making sure that normally it's November, you've got Alcohol Awareness Week. Maybe then you want to talk to students about coming back after Christmas, Dry January. There might be, you might do like a feel good February type activity. You might then want to do, like we did the Drink Rethink in April. So again, it's like maybe forms another tool in your year-round toolkit of making sure that it's a live, constant conversation you're having with students, rather than something you talk about maybe during welcome and then not again for the rest of the academic year.
Just one thing that I've not majored on, when we're talking about brief interventions, it isn't just about talking about the potential consequences. What you also discuss are strategies for reducing. And I think there's an opportunity just now in that no and low alcohol drinks, particularly around beer, are great strides have been made. There are still some horrible things out there, but we've got ways of having the social interaction that we have in pubs and bars, whilst still being able to drink no or low alcohol drinks, which I think is a relatively new thing. It's something that hasn't really entered into the strategies of any of the trials of identification brief advice. And I think, as well as discussing different concerns and different consequences from drinking, I think there's an opportunity to discuss different strategies for reducing consumption that don't necessarily mean, I mean, a student, I can imagine saying, what you mean, so I've got to stop drinking? So you mean I've got no social life? So, you know, you don't have to have no social life anymore. You never did, but you can drink normally without alcohol far more easily these days. And I think thinking about those strategies, again, in selling that sort of product in student union bars, but also discussing it in brief interventions as a strategy for reducing, may well be worth a try.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. So we're at time now, but thank you both so much for presenting to us. It was really, really fascinating and so great to have input there from Public Health England, which validates so much of this work and kind of gives us an international and a national perspective, whilst also hearing about how this works on the ground from you, Rachel, at UE. So thank you both so much for joining us. And everybody else will be taking a short returning for our final session of the day at 4 p.m. and the final session of the conference, which will be on tackling the off-campus issues. So go grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and I'll see you back at 4 o'clock.
Thanks, everyone.
If you want to keep on chatting in the chat box, you are of course welcome. This isn't a cut-off point for discussing these things.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak to us, Poppy. So to everybody joining, so Poppy Humphrey is from Manchester Student Homes, which is an organisation that here at SOS UK we really look up to and really admire the work of, and they do excellent work helping students integrate into the community. And I won't do too many spoilers for Poppy's slides, so I'll let Poppy introduce Student Homes herself, but just to say we're really excited to have you here, Poppy, and thank you for joining us. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay, and if you could just let me know that you can see everything okay there.
Of course, yeah, it's displaying perfectly.
Okay, so far everything's okay with the text. That's good. All right, thanks again, Michelle. Thank you very much to everyone out there that's listening, or if you're listening at some point in the future. I hope that you've had a fantastic conference, and I'm conscious that this is the last session of the entire conference. So hopefully we'll take you out with on a high note. If you've got any questions as I'm going along, then I'm very happy to be interrupted, and Michelle is going to help me out with that. So Michelle, if there's anything that pops up in the chat, then feel free to chip in and I can respond to it, or likewise at the end, very happy to answer any questions or discuss anything in further detail. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my role and Manchester Student Homes, and then we're going to talk you through about some of the work that we've done previously with regards to supporting students when they're living off campus, and then also more recently. I don't want to discuss too much COVID, because I'm not sure if you feel the same as me, but it feels as though it's just infiltrating every single part of our life at the moment. But I want to talk to you about some really positive things that we've done to support students in the past year or so. So, I'm Poppy. Thank you very much for coming along to my presentation this afternoon, and on such a beautiful day as well. I'm dialing in from just outside of Manchester, and it's not raining here, which is quite remarkable. So I am the off-campus student affairs officer, and I'm based at Manchester Student Homes. Manchester Student Homes is a jointly funded department of the University of Manchester and Manchester Metropolitan University. We also have service level agreements with a number of other institutions within the city, such as Royal Northern College of Music, Salford University, and also the Manchester College as well. So we originally started out, you could just bear with me as I'm trying to move through the presentation. Sorry if this isn't working. We originally started out as an advice bureau for students, and that was probably about 20 years ago. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Unipol model, but we were very much there to provide advice and support and guidance to students about all aspects of housing. We're not legally trained, but we do offer free information and guidance and check people's contracts, and generally any concerns to do with housing. Students are encouraged to come to us from colleagues within the university.
And Poppy,
yes.
And we meant, so we're still on that first slide, which is like the black slide with the, yeah. Sorry, for some reason I thought you were meant to be on the next one. Sorry, carry on.
No, I'm trying to, there we go. Sorry about that, everyone. I knew, do you know what? I knew it was too soon when I said that the tech was working. Please bear with me and thank you for your patience. So, so Manchester Student Homes, we started out about 20 years ago. As life as a housing bureau for students, and then in the past sort of 10-11 years or so, we found that we've been getting more and more involved in community work, and our view is very much that housing and community go hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. So in essence, Manchester Student Homes operates on behalf of the universities in Manchester to provide services to students on all aspects of campus living. So a very simplistic view would be housing and community. I'm about to try and move forward to the next slide, and hopefully this will work. Yes, it does. Perfect. So in practice, we're very much seen as offering advice about housing, advice about community, but what that means in reality is that we are seen as the front door to the university. Our offices are based down in Fallowfield. For those of you that are unaware, Fallowfield is a couple of miles south of the campuses in Manchester, and it's a hugely diverse community, but there is a high density of students that live off campus. And we do also have student accommodation that's kind of just on the periphery of Fallowfield as well. So we're out there in the community, and what we find is that we have students accessing our services, we have long-term residents contacting us for advice and support when it comes to issues relating to the students in the university, local businesses, but also those people that, that work in other aspects of the community as well. And going back to our core sort of business, just so you know, this is just a snapshot of all of the things that we do at Manchester Student Home. So looking at the left-hand column, we run a landlord accreditation scheme and provide advice and guidance, as I said, about contract checking and anything to do with ensuring that students have access to safe and fair housing, and make sure that we're sort of maintaining those standards in the student housing market. So aside from our landlord accreditation scheme, we also do a huge amount in the community, and I'm not going to go through all of these. And if I'd have picked up every single piece of work and put it onto this slide, I think I would have had to have used size 2 font to put it all in. So I've just picked the key ones here, but I suppose the purposes of how I've become involved in work around sort of alcohol and drugs in an off-campus setting, we have our Hall to Home campaign, and this is very much aimed at supporting students pre, during and post that transition from halls of residence out into the community. And if you think about that, that could potentially be quite an overwhelming piece of work, anything to do with that transition and thereafter. So we split it down into sort of manageable chunks, or if I'm presenting to senior colleagues, I like to call them thematic policy areas. And they are housing, which is our core business, but also a huge amount of work around student safety, whether that's from a property security or a personal safety perspective. Also looking at waste and environmental issues, looking at drugs and alcohol, and I'll come on to that shortly. Looking at things around noise and antisocial behaviour, but also celebrating the massive contributions that our students bring to the city and also to the local and hyperlocal communities, either with sports teams or the economic contribution, the vibrancy, the diversity, the human capital that they bring, or through the tens of thousands of hours of volunteering that they contribute to our communities. So that's a summary of what we do, and I'm going to talk to you about how things were ticking along quite nicely in Manchester in an era known as BC, which is before COVID. So I'm not sure, for those of you that were on the call slightly earlier and heard Michelle and I talking about our involvement with alcohol impact. Manchester Student Home is really, really proud that we're working with Manchester Metropolitan Students Union right at the beginning of the NUS Alcohol Impact initiative. We were involved in the pilot year for that. We did a huge amount of work together in partnership with the Students Union. And one of the projects that we were really proud of is we created a video which was in an off-campus setting, and it followed a group of students throughout one evening and looked at some of the unintended consequences of excessive alcohol consumption. I think the thing that we were super proud of about this particular video was that everyone who featured in it was a real person. So it was filmed live, on location, I should say, in Fallowfield. We had real students, real landlords, real long-term residents, and real police officers. And we put the video out and we received some fantastic feedback about that. We also received some feedback from people who didn't necessarily think it was a good video, but we received over 10,000 hits on YouTube. We're talking a few years ago, so that was something we were quite pleased about, and an article in the Huffington Post as well. But overall we were really pleased with that as a piece of work. So that's going back sort of several years now. So we've been involved with alcohol impact for quite a sort of significant period of time. Some other work that we've done as well is working with some leading academics. So name a few, we've got a really good relationship with a chap called Dr. Rob Ralphs, who's based at Manchester Metropolitan University, and he is a senior lecturer in criminology. And how we at Manchester Student Homes have worked very closely with Dr. Ralphs and his student groups to develop specific academic research projects, student-led research projects, looking at the use of alcohol and drugs within certain groups of students and their attitude towards that. He's done some really interesting work looking at the club industry as well. We also have worked with Oliver Sutcliffe, who is also based out of Manchester Metropolitan University. They've got a really interesting initiative there called Mandrake, and at the end I've put the link to it. This is a drug testing facility where they work very closely with the staff in halls of residents and also Greater Manchester Police to test any drugs that have been confiscated, to work out if there's any batches that are going to dangerous batches, and then following on from that, they publish messages about safety to students. So Mandrake is a very interesting concept. We've also worked with Professor Darren Smith. So Darren is based out of, or Professor Smith is based out of Loughborough University, and he actually coined the phrase studentification. He's done a huge amount of research all over the world, actually, primarily in England, but also in North America and also China, looking at the student experience and the impact of large concentrations of students in off-campus communities. He's also done some interesting work in Leeds, looking at de-studentification. So that's when the area changes again, when you see the high density of students moving to other parts of the city, perhaps to more purpose-built student accommodation, and the effect on the communities once the students have perhaps migrated to elsewhere. So we do a lot of work with academics, and as well as that, we also commission student-led research. So each year I get to work with groups across both universities to deliver some insights into various different issues relating to students off campus. For the purposes of the presentation today, two in particular that were most insightful. The first was a project that we asked two students from Manchester Metropolitan to deliver. And this was probably about 4 years ago, and I gave them a very sort of generic project title, which was go and find out about attitudes towards alcohol amongst the student community. What they found, they went and interviewed service users at the Brian Hoare Clinic in Manchester, which is a unit for people with primarily alcohol dependency issues. And the feedback that they gave in their academic research was that they were really surprised, because and it was wonderful that they were invited in to speak to some of the service users. In their view, they anticipated that there was going to be people that were significantly older accessing those services. But when they had discussions with the service users, there were many people there that said that their relationship with alcohol started at university, particularly in their first year, and then as they went through the trajectory and moved off campus, and then third year and potentially fourth year, they felt as though their relationships and behaviours were really defined in that first year. And the feedback that we had as part of that project was that actually we were seeing people with really corrosive liver damage, but in their late 20s, early 30s, just because the way in which certain people were were drinking would be classed as so excessive. So that was the first piece of research that I just wanted to reference. And if anyone is interested in finding out more about these student-led research projects, very happy to share them with you and share the findings. The second piece of research was a project that I asked a group from University of Manchester to undertake. And this was looking at the changing patterns of socialisation. Unfortunately, a great deal of my role is taken up with dealing with some of the challenges that are faced when you have a large concentration of young people or students living within a certain geographical area. So, for example, lots of complaints about noise, antisocial behaviour and parties, and that's still the case at the current time as well. I also just want to point out that year on year, I deal with more complaints from students about their peers, and particularly this year, I've dealt with a huge amount of complaints from students, not only about their peers, but also about long-term residents and their behaviour as well. So this project, looking at the changing patterns of socialisation, was really interesting because came off the back of me dealing with probably my busiest year in terms of complaints about large-scale house parties. And unfortunately, we'd had a few incidents where there was some significant safety issues linked to those large-scale house parties, either from a fire safety perspective or students unfortunately being the victims of serious assaults. So these students went out and did some really, really thorough research with their peers, and what they explained to me was that actually there is a real death of the club industry in Manchester and beyond as well, and that actually the preference from students is that they don't necessarily feel comfortable going out to socialise in clubs or in other settings like that. There was also the talk about sponsorship and influencers, and that's very appealing, and it's something that we experience a lot of in Manchester. So companies that are very well known, alcohol companies, Smirnoff comes to mind, and Bacardi as well, will actually seek out students and encourage them to host large-scale house parties, and they will sponsor students for that and sponsor the house party. So those projects were particularly insightful, and I think the one thing for us is that whenever we work with a student group, we always ask them to make recommendations to us about how we can improve our services, our messages, our campaigns to students. So we built in a lot of their recommendations in terms of events and community action days. We also tailored our communications to students. We also tailored our communications to accredited landlords about encouraging students to be aware of some of the dangers associated with large-scale house parties. And we also, off the back of that, worked with Manchester City Council to set up a local pub watch group as well. And that group has been really, really effective. Obviously, things have gone slightly quiet in recent times, but the pub WhatsApp group has recently got very busy, with everyone getting very excited about reopening. But we do a lot of work with the licensing team at Manchester City Council to make sure that the pubs and anyone operating within the nighttime economy in Manchester is making sure that they're doing so in a responsible way, making sure that our students are kept safe when they're out and about. So I think that this might be the opportunity to give myself a break from talking and for you to maybe have a break from listening to me. And I'd like to show you, with the help of Michelle, a little video that was created. Back in November 2019, I actually went back to live with a group of students, and the reason why I did this is because I'm conscious that when you're doing a job like mine, which is ultimately supporting students at a particular point in their life, it's important that I have an understanding of the student experience. So I went back to live with a group of students for a whole week, and there is a suite of videos, but I'm going to hold those back and I'm happy to share them with you. But I think Michelle is going to show you the trailer for Poppy's Wild Week.
Wicked. Hey, can you see the screen now? Is it all right, Poppy?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, I'm going to press play. So this is the first time this conference that we've used a video. We've done lots of tech checks, so it should all be okay. But Poppy, if you just unmute and tell me if there's anything wrong, because I can't see the chat box.
Okay.
Students sometimes have a bad reputation in terms of being noisy, disrespectful, and not integrating into the local community. But are we just hearing one side of the story? In order to find out what life is really like for a group of students living off campus, I'm going back to live with them for a whole week, and I'm scared.
Hi.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you too. I'm Poppy. So basically Poppy, be funny. Okay, got it. Literally got no idea what's going on.
Again.
I'm genuinely surprised at how busy it is. Don't look at my search history.
Hello? Is anyone in?
I'm literally the world's worst driver. Oh, who am I passing it to? Oh, sorry Denise. It just goes to show how easy it would be for anyone with far from the best of intentions to get in and you know, nick people's stuff or worse. Do I get paid for today?
Sorry, no.
Can I take this off though? Nice pub, nice little bar. There's Manchester Student Homes offices, guys.
Hey, we can come and say hi to you.
This one's obviously going to be way more secure because it doesn't have a door handle, which means you need a key to get in.
I mean, that takes doesn't it? There's some really lovely bits that are just on the doorstep as well, yeah.
We're still going, we're still going, we're still going.
How the f did that? At least I didn't catch that on camera.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Okay, so just a couple of points to make with regards to the clip that you've just seen. Apologise for the beeping as well. I did actually pass my driving test first time, which is remarkable. And when I showed that video to my mum, I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "It makes it a lot easier to score a goal in hockey when there's no one in the goal." And I was like, "Thanks, Mum, bring me down to earth." So that was a really interesting week. The group that I lived with was a mixture of second and third years from across both universities, studying a broad range of different subjects. And we worked with a company called Campus Life. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Campus Life. I'll put a link at the end of the presentation. But I'm just going to share my screen again. Sorry about that, everybody. They're based out of Leeds, and they are a student communications company that do a huge amount of really insightful consultation with students about all aspects of the student experience. So if you're not familiar with Campus Life, it's definitely worth looking into the work that they do. Campus Life were very considered in the group that they chose, because we wanted them to be relatable to a certain cohort of students that live off campus, primarily in the South Manchester area. And during my week with this group of students, we had really candid chats about drug and alcohol perceptions and their use of drugs and their attitudes towards alcohol, and they were very candid with me. Certain things they didn't necessarily want to go on camera, which I understood, but I felt as though it was useful to get their input into certain projects that we'd worked on before, and some of them they felt were, you know, appropriate in terms of the tone and that they were relevant, and some of them they had to give me the devastating news that they thought that the campaigns that we were running were way off the mark in all aspects. They also reinforced some of the findings from the previous academic research project that I mentioned, changing patterns of socialisation, and they couldn't agree more. That it's very appealing for certain groups to host large-scale house parties and to have their parties sponsored by high-profile companies. So you can see all of the videos. They're split down into different themes. We did a lot of work with the police where we went out and looked at property security. I went on a litter pick as well, which I have to say wasn't my favourite day, but the whole suite of videos, and you're more than welcome to have a look. We were just about to go live with these as COVID hit, and understandably the decision was taken that we couldn't roll them out because there is a lack of social distancing, but it's something that we're looking forward to rolling out as and when things return back to, I'm not going to say normal, Michelle and I had that conversation before, but return back to some point where perhaps social distancing isn't as much of an issue as it is now. So that's some of the work that we were doing BC before COVID, and if you could just bear with me, I'm struggling to move on to the next part of the presentation, but I think that we're here now. Okay, so in terms of some of the demands that we've seen for service and support in recent times, just ahead of the presentation today, I got in contact with a colleague from University of Manchester who runs the health and wellbeing services. So if you can hear some strange noises, I've got a family of pigeons outside, so I'll just choose to try and ignore them. Sorry about that. So my colleague Spencer Davis from University of Manchester advised that they've had an increase of 25% in terms of the take-up for health and wellbeing services, and I think that there will be no surprises with that. What they did say was that accessing support for drug and alcohol concerns or issues was really hard to qualify, because quite often those issues are part of a bigger picture, and that individuals will vary the extent to which they want those disclose those issues or want to discuss them. But some really interesting work that's going on here in Manchester is a pop-up clinic called Change, Grow, Live, which is focusing primarily on drug and alcohol services for students. So feedback has been that has been really, really well received by the students, but in terms of the data, because it's the first year that it's been delivered, we haven't got any comparable statistics, but needless to say, there is a huge amount of work going on to support students at the current time. I also should have said this earlier on, and the academic research project, Changing Patterns of Socialisation, I'm actually working with a new group of students at the moment. I've given them exactly the same project, but I wanted them to look at students' attitudes towards alcohol, drugs and socialising through the lens of COVID. They're currently just in the early stages of that project, but I'm very excited to see what their findings are with regards to that, and I'd be very happy to come back at a further point and present those findings perhaps with the students as well. In terms of the demand for our service at Manchester Student Homes from a sort of core housing perspective, we've seen demand this year increase threefold. And anecdotally, what we're getting is many students that want to be released from their contracts, understandable, but also lots of students contacting us to say that they feel very uncomfortable with the behaviour of their housemates, either linked to drugs or alcohol, or to their behaviour in terms of not complying with current restrictions. But certainly we're getting more concerns raised by students about their peers in terms of behaviour. Just in terms of some of the work that I've been dealing with Manchester City Council and Greater Manchester Police, so far this academic year we've dealt with 981, so just short of 1,000 different incidents, both on and off campus. The vast majority have been off campus. And again, there has been a significant number of students that have raised concerns with us about other community members. And it's important to say that when we talk about the community, we very much see that students are part of our community. So I think the other thing that we are really keen to focus on, not just at Manchester Student Homes, but across our partnership, whether that's with our students' unions or with the council or with the police, is that we're all working together to support communities within communities and not see students as one big homogenous glob. So, for example, we've been doing a lot of work with international students and also the International Society as well, to put on virtual chats to see how they're doing when they're living off campus. Primarily, lots of international students live in purpose-built student accommodation rather than the HMO properties out in the community, but that's still off campus. So we've been doing events to engage with our international students. And what we found is that we were putting on these events to give them housing advice and support, and the conversations quickly turned into people feeling very isolated and under a lot of pressure. Again, no surprises, and I'm sure things that have been discussed throughout the conference. But I think even as we move back to a point where perhaps we're going back into the office and we can put on events face to face, it's really important that we do keep up with the virtual engagement as well, because we've been receiving lots of feedback from students that tell us that that's really, really worthwhile. So the other thing that I just wanted to just point out as well is that I said right at the beginning, we're seen as the front door to the community. It's a fine balance to respond to all of the needs of all of those people that live and work in the community. And it's fair to say that there are quite a few tensions in our off-campus communities, but nevertheless we are here to support all of those who live and work, but fundamentally we are a student support service. Okay, so one thing that we feel has worked very, very well since the beginning of September is that we've always had a really strong partnership in Manchester, and I say partnership with Manchester City Council, Greater Manchester Police, Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue, the universities, of course, and of course our student unions and the elected officers, as well as the permanent members of staff. For the first 3 months of the academic year, we met daily, not Saturday and Sunday, as a multi-agency group. And we ensured that we had the right people around the virtual table. So that was colleagues from halls of residence, colleagues from security, colleagues that led on comms. We had senior colleagues there. We had operational staff there as well. We had senior police officers and also some of the bobbies on the beat. We had colleagues from the City Council's ASB team. We had colleagues involved in health and wellbeing. And those meetings were half an hour every morning to look at issues around behaviour, but also issues around student safety, health and wellbeing. And from that, we looked at targeted communications that we needed to put out to our students, as well as wider community stakeholders such as long-term residents. And that was really, really useful in terms of being able to assess what was going on both on campus and off campus, but also making sure that when we were getting feedback from our students about what we were doing well and what we weren't doing so well, that we could respond to that appropriately. I think the other thing that we need to bear in mind as well is that we've got communities like Fallowfield in Manchester, and we've got very hyper-local issues going on there. But then we also have local issues as Manchester as a whole, and then within a national context and a global context. And I think that what happens globally then trickles down to nationally, to locally, and then hyper-locally as well. So we look at the bigger picture as part of those meetings. Now, what we've decided was that to meet every single morning was quite onerous, and actually we did have real buy-in from the whole partnership. We now meet twice weekly as a group, and we found that that's been really effective. There has been a huge amount of firefighting, but I think that that's just a realistic assessment of how things have been for the past year. But we are trying to plan, and going forward, I'll just skip ahead to this and then come back to the previous slide. What we've done is we've looked at the government roadmap for easing restrictions, and we've overlaid it with some work of the Greater Manchester Police, some work of Manchester City Council, and then we've also looked at some key dates in line with the student academic year as well. And from that, we will, as a partnership, be pushing out messages to really support our students. So an example that I can tell you now is that in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see some changes where 2 households are able to go out and meet outside. Now, if you were to look at a large student HMO, you may have a household of 13 who is able to legally mix with another household of 13. The perception may be that that's a group of students who are breaking the rules, whereas actually they're not doing anything wrong. So it's really important for us that we're clear with students about expectations of behaviour and what they are able to do and what they're not able to do, just as any other citizen of the country, but that we also manage the perceptions of the long-term residents around this. So there's a lot of work that we have to do, as everybody does, with regards to easing lockdown restrictions and making sure that our students feel supported during that process. As always, we are always listening to what our students are telling us, and this is a bit of a challenge for us. So you'll see the picture on the right hand side, Fallowfield Student Group. This was a Facebook group that was set up as a ticket selling site a few years ago. And from that, it grew and grew in popularity, and it's now got about 50,000 members on it. Myself and my manager have worked very hard with the moderators of that group, because we recognise that actually, whilst we have 50,000 students right there that we can get messages out to about community living and where they can come to access support and about all sorts of things in line with our Halls to Home campaign, it's not appropriate for us as officers to go and engage with students in what we see as a very protected space, if that makes sense. But what we do is weekly sweeps of the Fallowfield Student Group, and that's with the permission of the moderators. And the insight that we get is invaluable. And it's also been very useful in terms of us gauging student perception of the universities, but also external partnership agencies like the police, for example. It's also been really instrumental in the police successfully solving a number of crimes as well, because what we feel is that students talk to each other. It's become almost like a Facebook neighbourhood watch, but they don't always report things to the police for whatever reason. So we make sure that on a weekly basis we're keeping an eye on Fallowfield Student Group, just to listen to what our students are saying, because we understand that that can inform our campaigns and make sure that, again, they're relevant in terms of their tone. And actually, some of the things that the students are saying aren't always positive about the work that we do, but we have to take that on board. And ultimately, that's something that we need to utilise to shape our campaigns going forward. So, next steps. As always, we need to listen to our students, but also to all members of our community. We, when we're able to, are going to develop some community action days. So we've got some coming up in the next month, hopefully, if we're allowed to do that, which will be getting students, long-term residents, landlords, people that live and work in the community to come out and do some community cleanups, as well as we're starting to see nicer weather, even in Manchester. Unfortunately, we're seeing issues around the use of our parks, and our students have been, whilst they have been involved in some of the issues with the parks, they've also mobilised themselves to come out and get involved in community cleanups, which has been fantastic. The academic research projects that I mentioned before, I'm looking forward to seeing the findings of particularly of the changing patterns of socialisation through the lens of COVID. We've also got another academic research project being delivered by students looking at the local offer in the South Manchester area. So, for example, we have a high density of pubs and takeaways and general sort of nighttime economy related establishments. So we're doing some work with Manchester City Council and the students on that. We also need to continue looking at the transition off campus and the additional support that our students are going to need, and I would say now more so than ever in all respects. And also just the fact that this is going to be very much a team effort as well, so we need to make sure that when students are moving off campus, that they've got really strong relationships with those long-term residents, and that's something that we need to work with both parties to help facilitate. And that also when students are moving off campus, they have the support of their landlord as well if there's any challenges there. I think we need to review our educational campaigns as well, and that's something that we started looking at already, but I think we'll be in more of a position to look at that as we review sort of feedback and intelligence of what our students are saying to us about the types of support that they need next academic year, and ultimately that links to our services being shaped in response to what our students need. So, the other thing that I should have mentioned, apologies, is that we've linked to some of the messages that were on the Fallowfield student group, which is the Facebook group. We've set up a number of working parties with our students. One was around concerns to do with sexual harassment and sexual assaults in Manchester. And off the back of that, a group was set up with students, with the council, with the police, with colleagues from the universities, and also the Students' Union as well, to make sure that we were responding to the concerns of the students, and that actually it was really being driven by the students. So that's one particular piece of work. We also have had concerns from students about sensitive turnover and how that's going to look as well. So that's when the students are moving from their halls of residence to the community, or from their off-campus residence to the next property. So we recognise that we need to start planning for that now. So that's going to happen over the summer. But again, we've been informed by what our students are telling us. Some things are very cyclical, so we know that we need to plan it in. But again, this is very much driven by what we hear from our students, as well as the kind of business as usual in line with the student calendar of events. So in terms of some useful links, I'm heavily involved with an organisation called ASRA, which is the Association of Student Residential Accommodation. You can have a look at their website, and that's for colleagues that work in student accommodation, but in all aspects. So, for example, if there's anyone on the call involved in Res Life, then that's something that you might want to look up if you're not already familiar with ASRA. Shout out to my colleagues at Campus Life, who are really fantastic at what they do, and they've got some great videos, and it would be worth going and have a look at some of the innovative campaigns that they've developed. And students really are at the heart of everything that they do. UKTGA stands for the United Kingdom Town and Gown Association. So this is an organisation that myself and my manager established back in 2014. Town and Gown is everything that we've discussed. It's where you have the town folk meet the gown folk, and how those communities can live and work harmoniously together. So we've brought together a group of colleagues that do very similar roles to me from up and down the country, and we work together to leading practice and support each other on all sorts of campaigns and events. So most recently there was some interesting campaigns that were being delivered by Queen's University Belfast in the run-up to St Patrick's Day. So have a look at the website, because we publish a lot of the work that we're doing on there. Linked to that is the ITGA, which is the International Town and Gown Association, which is based in South Carolina in America, and they're a really, really well established network from all across North America, and we work very closely with them. Again, they do very similar work that we do with the UKTGA, Obviously, they have very different laws around alcohol over there. But again, there's a plethora of information and campaigns and leading practice on their website. And then finally, I mentioned Mandrake, which is the drug testing facility run by Oliver Sutcliffe out of Manchester Metropolitan University. So it's worth having a look at that link as well. So thank you very much for your time and for your patience with some of the tech issues. And if you've got any questions, I would be delighted to answer.
Just while we're waiting for some questions to come in, to give people a chance to submit those, I was just thinking, so I know you mentioned, well, one thing that I really, really loved in your presentation was how you talked about students as being part of the local community. I think we often hear about it as students and the local community rather than students in the local community, which is really, really great. I've heard before of some initiatives to help students who are moving into an area kind of integrate with long-term residents. And I think a lot of the issues that come out of that come around alcohol use and kind of people getting annoyed with students for kind of coming home drunk and stuff is to do with them not necessarily seeing students as people. And I've heard of initiatives like people taking like little notes, or like students' unions giving plants for people to give to their neighbours and things like that. Have you heard of any initiatives or ideas that kind of help our students to kind of make those links with neighbours and kind of improve relations, or do you think that they're a bit gimmicky, and what's your perspective on that?
Okay, thank you, Michelle. There are some things that I think don't necessarily work as well. So there was one that was floating around not so long ago, which was a postcard which you could clip a tea bag to and then go and post it through your neighbour's door and say like, hi, have a brew on me. If someone just put a manky tea bag through my door, I think I appreciate the sentiment, but I think I probably I wouldn't use that. Some things that we've done in Manchester that have worked really well. So we got a group of students to work with a group of long-term residents to come up with a campaign called Hidden Gems, and this was aimed at encouraging students to go and explore the local community and ultimately feel very much a part of the community and utilise you know, the local parks and shop local and get to know the local community assets. So that was a really, really effective campaign, and we came up with a list of about 25 hidden gems, and we had some maps that we then made virtual and encouraged people to go out on walking tours. They were actually very popular. So we had students and long-term residents, and we had students as tour guides going around and saying, and on your left we have a heart-shaped boating lake, and on the right is a I'm going to get this wrong, but it's a water trough from the 1800s at the end of Copson Street. And then, you know, for anyone who wants to stay, let's go for a pint, or, you know, have a glass of orange juice at the Red Lion, which has got a beautiful bowling green at the back. So we've done stuff like that. We did our Hidden Gems campaign as a virtual gems at the beginning of lockdown a year ago, and we passed that out to via various different channels to try and encourage students to look at the local area, but virtually from the safety of their own home. The other thing that we've done as well is that we've had some funding in the past from universities to put on community events. We had two in particular. One was called Community Fun Fest, which was taking the idea of a party, which unfortunately has quite a negative connotation in some of the communities within South Manchester, and turn it into a street party where we got student volunteers to come along and play music. So we had Royal Northern College of Music playing the harp, and then we had singers. We also had students that were sold their own produce to come along and bake cakes. We had organic coffee bites. We had a washing line where people could talk about their memories of the local area. So we did that, and it was really, really well attended. And the whole idea was come out and see what's going on in the street, and actually, you know, have a organic coffee. and get to know your neighbours and strike up a conversation. We also did something similar called it was had a focus on health and well-being, where we sectioned off part of the park, and we had things like stick hoppers and hula hoops and Reiki, and we encouraged long-term residents and students to come out and sort of get together and be part of this. So we've done that, and that's worked very well. I think the challenge is that each year we need to keep up the momentum, because most students move on from their particular house, you know, in any given year. But you know, we do lots of things. So the other thing is, at the start of the academic year, and then periodically, we work with the city council and the police to hire an ice cream van, and we go around and hand out free ice cream to all members of our community. So instead of a 99er, you can have a 999er, and then there will be a police officer doing your Mr. Whippy or whatever and handing the students the ice cream. But again, it's just a way to have that kind of, I don't really like the phrase, but teachable moment, where you can have a chat with someone, have an ice cream, and the long-term residents love it just as much as the students do.
I bet.
You know, we'll go out there and say free ice creams for everybody, and people sort of just get together. It always rains though, that's the thing, it always rains. So yeah, things like that we do a lot of. And the other thing as well, and I'm sorry, I meant to mention it, is we've recently got some funding from the Community Safety Partnership at Manchester City Council. So a big shout out to them that have given us some funding for some community playing cards. We've done this before, but we've had to revise some of the messages. So they're just packs of playing cards, but on each one there's a message about one of the thematic policy areas that I mentioned before. But we get some really, really good feedback from students about them. They love having a free pack of cards. They do tell me that they use them. And again, anything that we can do to just drip feed those messages, whether it's about drugs, alcohol, where to go for support, how to get housing advice, how to stay safe, how to have the best possible student experience. If we can just get those messages out at every opportunity, then that's what we're aiming to do.
That sounds fantastic. And I bet that there are so many people on the call who would really love to have an organisation like you in their local area. It sounds absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for sharing all of your learnings with us.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, we have reached the end of the Students' Alcohol and Drugs Conference. I hope that you've all really enjoyed it. We will be sharing the videos with you. So we'll be sharing the video tomorrow morning of all of the sessions today. And then it might just take us a couple of days just to process them and put them all on a private YouTube channel that you can visit as well. Because at the minute, the recordings from Zoom will just show you a whole day at once, which can be a little bit less user-friendly. But I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Poppy and all of the other speakers. I know some of you are still on the line for helping us with the conference. It's the first time that we've included drugs as a topic, but we've tried to keep it kind of quite broad, and including people like Poppy in it is vital, as we don't solve the issues around drugs and alcohol in isolation from other student wellbeing issues. So a huge thank you to everybody for being involved, and I'll hope to see you next year, if not before.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.